Hi, Zach. Here we are.
Here we are. Hi, Corissa.
It's wonderful to see you.
It's nice to see you. I'm grateful to be here today.
I always love when I get to speak to artists because they've got their artwork usually around them. Is that one of your pieces behind you?
Yeah, two of them actually. So I'm in this yeah.
Ooh,
They're sort of just
gorgeous.
stacked side by side. Thank you. Yeah, I'm in a new place and I haven't hung the art yet. And what was so funny, so I have art throughout my place just sort of on the floor like that, leaning against the wall. And what's funny is I had a friend over and he was like, he didn't know that I hadn't hung the art yet. He goes, I can't tell if that's where that belongs or if you just haven't taken the time to hang it yet. Cause he goes, it kind of works.
Totally. I know it's
So
the art of
yeah,
decorating that looks like you've not decorated.
yeah,
Totally.
it is an art. Yeah. The whole try to look like you're not trying, right? It's an art. It's a fashion. Yeah. So this is simply me not quite having it up yet. And the reason for that is because I don't know if I want to go the usual route and just put nails in the wall. But I also hear that there's these really cool like stick on hooks that can actually carry a lot of weight now, which would be
Ooh.
cool because I'm renting. So the less holes I put places, the better. And not that that's an issue really. But, and then also I don't know if I want to do a frame. I don't know if I want to do a frame. So, and if I do a frame, it's got to be big because a lot of my pieces are big and they keep getting bigger. So it's probably something that I even want to make myself. So I'm trying to figure out what I want to do, frame, no frame. So I have a couple things to feel through with the art, but it's here for now and it's good.
I love that the creative process, it
Yeah.
continues to extend with the how it's displayed, not just within its own frame, but then also how it's
Isn't that cool?
displayed in the world, right? In your
Isn't that awesome?
space, moving it around to different spaces. I
Mm,
love that about art, how art pieces, famous art pieces usually, right, get moved into different spaces.
sure.
And, whether that's a museum space or a hotel lobby, or, someone's got it for 6 months over here in this gallery,
Right.
you get to experience it differently. The way the light hits it, the way the
Yes.
space feels around it that you're in changes
Yeah.
how it feels. So
Yeah.
it's like a
Yeah.
living thing.
Yeah, it's right. It's in relationship to its environment, and then it takes on a sort of a new feel depending on what's happening. And then also the creation of the relationship with the viewer. Somebody comes over, in the case of my place, somebody goes to that museum, visits that business. Everybody has their own relationship to that artwork, which is also part of the creation, right? Which
Yeah,
is like the co-creation because
seriously.
it's like that whole like if a tree falls in the woods type of thing, right? Like is it art if nobody's observing it?
Yeah,
And then somebody observes and what does it become upon that observation? You know?
exactly. My last solo cast episode, I
Mm,
talked about that regarding the podcast. I said,
mm,
we are, the whole conversation I was having with myself, with the audience, was about being a channel, and not your traditional channel of channeling dead relatives necessarily,
mm,
but being a channel of communication that both receives and transmits information.
right.
And that if you're the transmitter of the information, let's say us right now talking to a podcast audience, the communication is only complete when there's a receiver and there's a channel on the other side picking up the transmission and receiving it. It's the same thing as the tree in the woods. If no one is listening and actually taking in this information, the wholeness of it is not there. The communication is not whole. It's not, to me, it's not so much as so far as it doesn't exist, but that it's not complete.
Yeah. It's like that's what closes the loop is the reception. And without there's just a kind of an infinite potential almost. And I love how you say transmission reminds me of being like a radio. And that's a metaphor I've heard and also I use often, is tapping into different frequencies, tapping into different channels and seeing what comes through. So same thing, somebody to tune the radio, something coming through that transmission, but also someone listening to the music.
Mhm.
Otherwise, where is that sound going, right? Is it there? Yeah.
Which is so important for people to hear who aren't creators. And I use that aren't very lightly because I believe we all
Right.
are
Yeah. Yeah.
creators. We are creating life in our bodies at every moment. We are creating new cells, if that's at the very basic of how we're creating at the moment. But we're all creators, whether we're living in that creative space or not. But I think there tends to be in our culture a not a prioritization, maybe a hierarchy of the importance of that creation. Creation that gets a lot of notice, creation that then people pay a lot of money for it, creation that people pay a lot of attention to ends up being more valued. And then creation that is being made would be next. And then people who don't or aren't actively creating are sort of at the bottom of that hierarchy and often feel lesser than because they're not creating something and they're just consuming. And that to me is one of those false narratives. I mean, obviously there's no hierarchy that's real. It's just a socially constructed hierarchy. But for anyone to not feel like they're contributing when they're the viewer, when they're the listener, when they're the consumer is just false to me.
See.
You are not just necessary, you're necessary for that completion, for
Hmm.
that wholeness, for that
Hmm.
the closing of the loop, as you said.
Hmm.
So it's not even that you're like secondary. You're primary to the creation itself.
Hmm. Yeah. On some level, in multiple ways, in some level, you attracted that creation. On some level, you created it. And if we're really kind of going with unified consciousness, you created it and then you created the opportunity to receive it and what have you. In the receiving of it, in the consumption of it, I really agree with you. I think this is neat because the idea of passively consuming something is a bit of a fiction because you're consuming it. But one, your own sensory apparatus is part of that consumption, the way you see, the way you hear, the way you feel, and also then the way you think. So the way you perceive it, your interpretation of it, your perception of it, what you do with it, what you take away from it, how you implement it into your life, that is all part of your commentary on it. That is all creation.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. And
Yeah, it's new.
being an active participant in the process of that, I think is where, the line tends to be drawn of how active are you in that participation? How conscious of you or how conscious are you of
Hmm.
your participation in that?
Hmm.
Because you can mindlessly consume. I mean, you're never totally mindless, but you can, what we would say, mindlessly consume content, right? You just like, walk through, oh yeah, I see that painting, see that sculpture, see that video,
Hmm.
whatever. And maybe you're eating and talking to your friends and not really paying attention.
Yeah.
Good. So there's obviously all different layers of how someone engages with anything. But
Yeah.
that's life, right? Our level of engagement with life, of how actively are we participating in that engagement? How conscious are we of the fact that we are an active participant in
Hmm.
this and not just that this life is happening to us and that we're just some rag doll, puppet on a string kind
Hmm.
of participant?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a nice way to this. I say this is new because this is sort of a new thread of thought for me because I know in my own life I do definitely in terms of the balance of creation versus consumption, which I've often seen as a bit of a binary, which we're collapsing right now in quite a beautiful way. I've always had an emphasis, and in many ways naturally so, of being more on the creative side, creating far more than I consume. I write more than I read. I make art more than I witness art, right? Whether that be some sort of media or painting or whatever. But that's the part that I didn't really think about is the creative process involved in the consumption. That's pretty cool. I'm going to sit with that.
I would argue, though, that you probably have, whether it's measured in quantity of time spent,
Hmm.
you've spent the time, you've taken in the energy of
Hmm.
writing, of
Yeah.
artwork, of
Hmm.
the world through that creative lens. You've opened yourself up to be the muse of creation,
Hmm.
to now let it flow through you or to have
Hmm.
it flow through you. But it comes
Yeah,
with consumption. They say none of us have an original idea. It's all just
exactly. It
floating
all
out
comes from
here.
somewhere.
Yeah. And so I think the originality comes in how we interpret those
Hmm.
ideas, how we put it on the canvas like you do, or in writing as you do.
It's a great example. I have moments to this day, just to illuminate what you're saying. I have moments to this day where I kind of go back and read something that maybe I read 6 years ago, and I actually recognize the way in which that showed up in my book or in an article I wrote or in a coaching session I had.
Hmm.
Not even recognizing that it had an origin in this. And by the way, of course, the origin was not in that book. It was from someplace before. Right? So it's just this sort of chain of this thread of what happens to these ideas and how they take different shape and form and means of expression. But that's the thing, like what you just said. My expression of that idea is unique.
Hmm.
Not the idea itself, not the concept itself, my expression of it, my interpretation of it, the way that I choose to put it out into the world. Yeah, I'm cognizant of that, even with painting, even with regardless of any visual inspiration I've had from other things I see. I didn't create the canvas. I didn't create the materials for the canvas. I didn't create the colors. I didn't create the paints. I didn't create the brushes. But my expression of utilizing those things ends up being something original at the intersection of all of them channeled through my expression. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw this post the other day from an entrepreneur, a quote unquote self made millionaire, who said, I hate the term self made.
Hmm.
I was helped. And it's similarly to what you just said of like, I didn't make the brushes that I'm using
Hmm.
to paint this canvas. I didn't mentor myself. I didn't teach myself this information. That information came and I consumed it. So that term self made gets thrown around a lot in the business world because there's a lot of, I guess, ego behind that. Like, oh, look what
Yes.
I did. A lot of
Yes.
pride. Like, I came from poverty, right? That's often a lot of
Hmm.
people's story. I came from nothing and now I'm an 8-figure entrepreneur,
Yes.
and beautiful for them, amazing for them. Not to discount what anybody did to get there. However, it's not a journey that you do alone. Doesn't matter whether or not you are a solopreneur, individual in your
Hmm.
business, so much conspired
Yeah.
for that to happen,
Yeah. Yeah. We don't exist in isolation.
which is a good
Everything,
thing.
everything conspires to support our very existence, let alone our success and whatever else happens in our life. There's an infinite myriad of factors that come together to support our every breath we take.
That's the most beautiful gift I've received from this spiritual path of not feeling alone, because
Hmm.
humans can let you down and can leave you alone, whether that's physically or emotionally, mentally. We all have our stories of how that might have occurred. And for me, it was, abandonment, and then in my adopted family, neglect. And then I carried those patterns. So then I was just doing it all to myself. So
Hmm.
I was the perpetrator for many
Oh
years.
yeah.
And
You took the torch. You go, I
I
got it from
did.
here.
Yeah. I'm like,
Don't
thanks
worry.
for those lessons, guys. I'm
Yeah.
going to go do
Yeah.
that really
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, that's
I'm gonna
come
do
up a
that
lot
better than you did it.
lately.
And but in all of that, feeling, and for me, that's been a big pattern in my human existence of feeling so alone and isolated. And then within the spiritual path and in this acceptance of this world as so much more than just our human experience here, accepting God or create a creator, accepting that there's infinite dimensions and realities that we can be in, that and that we're all connected energetically. So whether or not we're in the same room or in the same lifetime, we can communicate with each other and be connected through that type of channeling and that type of energetic connection. That has been the most beautiful gift because I never feel alone. I always feel supported. My human is comfortable and loves being by myself because I can have all these different conversations or receive transmissions or just have these connections with a tree or with an energetic being. I don't even know where it may not be coming from necessarily, but opening up on these totally different levels of connection and not just solely relying on the human to
Nice.
human connection.
Nice. Right. So what I'm hearing is you have a broader understanding of connection
Yeah. Broad.
that trend that yeah, and deeper. Yeah, as is always the case, right? Beneath and beyond. And whereas for a lot of people, the connection involves other people, other living beings, even like a pet, you are able to experience connection with plants, with other energies, with the world. Everybody has that ability. But I like how you're understanding that as connection, and there is no true aloneness, and that's what you're really understanding. Yeah.
It's awesome because I think that's one of the things that plagues a lot of people. They feel alone in their X, right?
Hmm.
Alone in
Hmm.
my disease, alone in my problem, alone in my issue, alone in my situation. And even though maybe consciously they know there's other people that go through this, it's
Mm.
hard not to feel alone in that problem when you're coming at it from that victim, for lack of a better term, standpoint, because it feels like it's all happening to you. And
Hmm.
so then, therefore, you are isolated and sort of trapped with your problem, trapped with that issue or that energy,
Even that
rather,
ownership of my problem, this is
yes,
mine. Yeah.
identifying
Yeah.
with it. Totally. My family and I, my husband and son and I have taken on, for a while, it was, of course, children's books with my son, reading books together. But now
Yeah.
we read books together that are books that my husband and I are choosing now because my son's 13. And so we're choosing books that we think, well, that we want to read or that we've read before. And so far, they've all been books we've read before. So we know it's
Yeah.
safe, or we
Yeah.
know it's a message that we want to
Sure.
share with our
Sure.
son in some way. But I don't know if you run into this before, you'll pick up a book, read a book. Well, you just said it yourself that
Hmm.
you'll remember and go, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of where I got that idea. Like, I'll read something and go, I don't remember any of this. I remember
Hmm.
it like cellularly, but I don't
Hmm.
remember the book, the words.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
an overall feeling about it. So anyway, we've been
Yeah.
reading this book called Not Fade Away with our son. And this book is about a guy who died in his late 40s of cancer. And he lived a very full life. And he tells of his life, but he tells of his process of dying and what he's realized, what he's seen, what he's come to understand about life. And it's been really interesting to read it because he's talking about, when you were saying, oh, the identifying of the problem, he's in the writing. And when he's writing this, it's too late. At this point, he's so far, he is in the last weeks, months, I think, of his life during the writing of this.
Mm.
It's the last, the
Wow.
because it's co-written. And so the
Okay.
co-author, there's a whole beginning part where the co-author writes about this experience of meeting this guy and then writing a book with him because the person dying wanted the book out there. So all of it happened within a few months span, and then he died. So it was just, it's very visceral writing.
Yeah. I
He's
have to read this.
realizing in it that he identified with his cancer, that the cancer became his cancer because he
Mm,
called it his
yeah.
cancer, that he owned it, and that he also gave up his power to the medical,
Oh, that's so fascinating. Yeah, that takes so much courage for in his dying days to not really admit that to himself, right? And let alone share it with the world, but really to admit that to himself that, oh wow, look at the ways in which I took ownership of this, or may have perpetuated this.
It's beautifully written too because it's not preachy. It's not like,
Hmm.
okay, like I'm going to stand on my soapbox and tell you what from a
Hmm.
high what I've realized in this.
Hmm.
He's just very humble and
Yeah.
vulnerable about it,
Gosh.
and as you read it, it's like you're reading his realization as it
My goodness, huh?
unfolds. It's a great book. It's fairly short but powerful. One of those ones I've started doing on the Everyday Mystic Instagram, starting doing books that we're recommending, and your book's on there. By the way, I have
Mm,
a post already created for it, and it's in the
nice.
schedule. And that book, Not Fade Away, will definitely be
Yeah,
one of those
I'm
because
gonna
it's
have
not
to read
a
it.
spiritual book. He actually wasn't a spiritual man, but he realized in his dying that he was. And he's like, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know what
yeah.
a soul is, but I know I have one.
I know I have one. Wow, that's beautiful. In a way, that probably makes it even more impactful and probably contributes to that tone of it not being preachy, which I always really respect and admire. And I love seeing the different inroads to spirituality that people develop, and dying is one of them. It's certainly one of them. Thank you. I'm gonna have to read that. Yeah, but when people take that ownership, I always used to look out for that, primarily when I was in the clinical mental health space, when people would say, my anxiety, my depression, I'm anxious, I'm depressed. Look at that language. I am this thing. You're really stacking the odds against yourself. Well,
Mhm.
because one of the strongest things that's been coming up a lot in my work with clients, one of the strongest forces in our lives is who we believe ourselves to be, which is another reason why when you get into spirituality and you are able to tap into a self-concept that is greater than your ego and recognize this expanded version of the truth of who you are, life transforms before your eyes. But even playing on the level of the ego, the story about who you tell yourself you are shapes everything. It shapes your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, which then ultimately reflects it back to you in your external reality through the outcomes you experience, and also through the way you experience them, the way you perceive them, because you will look at them through the lens of your own beliefs about yourself. So that whole thing, this just came up. I had a big breakthrough with a client a few days ago around this belief about herself that she is unlovable. And because of that, all this sort of intention to love herself and take care of herself and honor herself and create this life she enjoys, she's been sabotaging all of it because that's wants. But on a deeper level, what she wants even more than that is to maintain familiarity and maintain a life that's in alignment with her own self belief. And if that's being unlovable, going to create situations in which you feel unlovable, whether that's pushing people away who love you, or whether that's interpreting things, everyday interactions through the lens of you being unlovable, right? Because your own perception is one of the most important tools in the creative process. Everything's going to be filtered through I am unlovable. And that's what your life's going to look like. So then to achieve this experience of being lovable, there's this compensation that happens. I need to work extra hard. I need to try extra. I need to please people. I need to do all this stuff to be lovable because I'm compensating for this false belief that I am unlovable. And so there's this inner conflict which blocks the manifestation of being lovable. And as we discovered in the session, which was so beautiful, it's not about becoming lovable. It's about realizing you already are. That's the difference, right? It's you don't need to become lovable. You already are. So it's just about recognizing that, which is also getting rid of everything that stands in the way of that. So it's this process of dissolving
Mhm.
that we're tapping into a channel here. It's this
Seriously.
process of dissolving what's standing in the way, because the life we want is not about getting everything we desire. It's about becoming who we truly are, because everything we desire is so that we can feel a certain way. But those ways, abundance, freedom, peace, all the stuff that people want, which can be boiled down to a handful of words and even fewer frequencies, I would say, are all just the truth of who we are. So we're spending
Yeah.
all this time trying to achieve them through things in the world, when the ultimate path is connecting with the essence and the truth of who you are and becoming that truth, realizing that.
Mhm.
And again, when I say becoming, it's just realizing that you already are.
I love that word dissolving. And I think of that too
Yeah.
when it comes to the identities, like dissolving the identities that we've comfortably created.
Yes.
Just like you were saying, this woman, your client, has created an identity that she's unlovable. And there's an identity of people pleaser that then gets layered in there, and the identities of all of
Workaholic, people
then.
pleaser, all the compensations.
Yes. And so dissolving those identities are it's like the scaffolding of those identities are the beliefs, right? You have to, as you said, have those beliefs in place
Yeah.
for your identity to be intact, for you to feel like a real person, when that's not even who we really are. We're
Yes.
the soul beneath that person. We are the essence before all of that identity
Mhm.
construction. It's like,
Yeah.
let's just take all the raw materials,
Yeah.
scatter them about, and create something new out of all of that. And we have the power to do that.
Yeah. Because it's all the identity, you mentioned like the creation of the identity. For many people, that creation is not a matter of choice. It's a matter of conditioning. It's a matter of them being told and shown that throughout their life experience. And then I love, it's a full circle moment, because you brought this up earlier in your own experience, me too, how at some point then we don't need our caregivers, our society, people we rely on. We don't need them to tell us. We then start to tell ourselves, right? That voice, that self-talk becomes the talk that we experienced from such a young age, and then we do it, and then we perpetuate it. So for a lot of us, the stories that essentially make up our identity, which I truly believe is just a series of stories, those stories are simply the stories that were told to us repeatedly and shown to us repeatedly, to the point that they became so constant, they feel solid, they appear solid, they're unquestioned. This is who I am. And they become so incessant that we don't even question them anymore. And we take them on as truth, right? Which is just a story we believe.
So that is that telltale sign of someone's awakening, or someone's opening the door to the portal of their spiritual life, or this path that we talk about is the questioning. If you
Mm,
start to question reality, yourself, life as it is, when you start to actually put those questions on, those questions, maybe some of them seem to come from nowhere. They just kind of enter, and you have this question and you go, whew, I've never thought of that before. When we start to have these big questions show up and arise, it's just a clear sign. Okay, you're getting on the train.
mhm,
We're going
mhm,
now in a new
mhm,
direction.
mhm,
And that direction is in discovering those answers. And the answers end up being and pointing to often what you're saying, of that what you seek is and always has been within you, right? It's all we are, exactly what we need and want.
mm.
We are that. It's
Yeah, we're
about,
exactly what we're looking for.
yes. And it's about meeting that frequency, because our actions are powerful, whether it's the act of a thought or the action, physical action. Those are powerful things to continue to reinforce an identity or a belief or a program that came in elsewise, from society, from parents, from that repetition you were talking about. So we have to be active in the dismantling of that program and be as active in that discovery of that self, right? The who we are beneath it all, the who we truly are. And instead of being like, I need to get rid of this, I need to become that, it is that realization. I get to now vibrate in the frequency of who I really am. Because I do believe we have to do certain things, right? We have to actively, or we get to actively choose new thoughts, actively take different types of actions, because that stuff carries a ton of weight, doesn't it? Like it's not just going to happen because we think it. Like we really do need to put those thoughts into action or change our thoughts actively or work
We
on
need to like
feeling different
exercise our
things.
will, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And in doing that, we're meeting the frequency of who we really are, that soul self. And then it all aligns rather than saying, oh, we've got to get rid of this thing or we've got to let go of the ego as a big one, right? The ego and our soul self are often pitted against each other. One
Right.
of
They
like,
are.
oh, the ego's so bad. We got to get rid of our
Hmm.
ego and dissolve the ego. And well, I do love that word dissolving, but I feel like it's dissolving a meaning versus dissolving the thing itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Because there's a lot of purpose. There's a reason evolution created the ego. There's a reason we have one. There's a reason that it allows us to operate in this material world. Yeah. Do you find that anytime we make something bad or an enemy, or it always is fueling, it's never quite the way. Oh, it's fueling conflict, it's fueling resistance, which is the core ingredient of suffering. Think about the ego. If we make it bad, then all of a sudden now we're like resisting this ego, we're against this ego, which is more ego. So now you just have a layer cake of, ego. And then it's just this recipe for suffering. It's like release all of that. You're right. We are an active participant in the process. I often say to clients about these discoveries that, it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility.
Mhm.
These identities that we take on, they're not our fault, but they're our responsibility. And the more we can take responsibility for every aspect of our lives, including who we believe ourselves to be, the greater our lives become, the greater the potential for our lives become.
Yeah.
The more limitless the possibilities become. They're always limitless. We just get to realize that limitlessness.
It's so exhilarating too, to
Yeah.
be able to step into that and see that. It's also a shit ton of work, which I think
Mm,
is scary for
mm.
people to take that on and also to because of the fear that exists of what they might find.
Right. I was just going to say it requires courage, which is that action in the presence of fear. And it does. It requires courage because it is scary, because it shakes a lot of the foundation that you've built your life on,
Mhm.
and that can be a scary thing. But who is it scary to? It's scary to the ego. Again, that's okay. Not, oh, it's just the ego, so who cares? No, like that's okay. We need to acknowledge that. That's absolutely fine, right? And it's the ego, and we can reassure the ego in this process, but it's still the ego. That's the only thing that's afraid, right? Because the ego is the only thing that's been built on this house of cards that it thinks is like a rock solid foundation. And then you start to shake that up. Yeah, wow. There's a lot less certainty than I thought,
Yes,
which
right.
is again beautiful, but it's not a beautiful, not every part of ourselves really views it as something that's so beautiful and,
Well, hell
and
no.
fun.
I
Yeah.
think that most people end up getting really shooken in their life through a life experience that
Yeah,
will,
yeah, yeah.
slap them upside the head.
Mhm.
with this understanding or this realization because we are safe in that discomfort. We're safe in those personas. We're safe in the identities we've constructed. We've created a prison of safety
Mhm.
through whatever we've had to construct to be okay and be safe with whatever was coming at us from the outside. So then it ends up, depending on how intense that was, ends up creating a prison of your own safety. So you feel safe in this little cell,
Yes.
but you are completely locked in and
Yes.
not free. You've got the keys to get
Mhm.
out. So that's the
Mhm.
first thing to realize, right?
Mm.
I'm holding those keys right here.
Yes.
Now I've got to have the courage, as you said, to use them, unlock the door, see what's on that other side.
Right. Because there is something safe about the cell. And part of this, so this came up, I'm gonna go back to the client I was working with, just as one example, upholding confidentiality for this client. But this comes up all the time. And this is an exercise I love to do. In fact, I'd like to do it in the mentorship community we're doing. It's okay. There's you want to be lovable. You want to realize you already are lovable, but there's resistance to it because your identity has been built on being unlovable. So we do this exercise of that sort of illuminates the ways in which we are resisting the things we consciously want, because subconsciously, unconsciously, we actually want the opposite. And otherwise we would have exactly what those conscious wants are. There's got to be some sort of inner conflict. So we illuminate them. And this was interesting. So just to paraphrase it, it goes sort of like, I absolutely refuse to be lovable because. And you
Mm,
drop into a meditative state and you see what comes up. And there was a lot that came up. There was a lot that came up, but one of the trends in what came up was this idea of then I would be wrong about who I am. I'd be wrong about who I've been. I'd be wrong about what's happened to me and what it means for me.
yeah.
And so a lot of it was this idea of I'd be wrong and essentially I wouldn't know who I am anymore.
Hmm.
And that is kind of amazing because then what that shows is that there was, and this obviously is something we dissolved, but it's really interesting because it shows that parts of her that are running the show, would rather be right than be free.
Because that rightness feels safe to her,
Yes.
right?
Yes. The rightness is safe, it's secure. And in the safety, another word that goes hand in hand with that is familiarity. It's familiar. So there is, and this is when we become aware of this, then we can make a different choice. And that's one of the most exciting things. So, and usually this ends in laughter. And I look for the laughter because we have to laugh at ourselves when we realize that we are actually choosing to be right. We're choosing a familiar prison cell, than an unfamiliar freedom.
Hmm.
And that, I mean, what's more egoic than that, So it's funny because, and that's oftentimes why we don't actually manifest the things we want, because by nature of us wanting them, that means they're unfamiliar. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't want them, right? If we want it, it means we don't have it typically.
Right.
If we don't have it, it means that it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliar is in some ways unsafe. So even the amount of money you want, the relationship you want, the job you want, all these things externally, right, are sort of unsafe, no matter how great they might be, because they're unfamiliar. So people will repeatedly choose, again, this is not always a conscious process, but we make it conscious, which is where the freedom comes in, where the choice comes in. They're choosing limitation. They're choosing familiarity, even when it's painful.
Yeah. What a massive realization to know how responsible we are for
Yes.
that, but equally responsible for the change, to just
Yes.
simply put the key in the lock and
That's
unlock
it.
it, right?
That's
To just
it. If I'm
walk out.
responsible for putting myself in this prison cell and building it, then I'm also responsible for taking myself out of it. Beautiful. That's another thing I say all the time is that when you take responsibility for the problems, quote unquote, problems that you're experiencing, then you also take responsibility for the solutions. It's the greatest gift you can give yourself is to take responsibility for your life and everything in it.
I love the whole concept of the familiar, unfamiliar, and
Yeah.
how that ties into safety. That's big. And I'm going to explore that more personally. How would you, for a coaching client of yours, suggest that they become more familiar with something that they're unfamiliar with in a way that, I mean, I know that would be pretty individual depending
Hmm.
on
Sure.
how scared or how fearful someone is in their life, but what
Hmm.
would be some basic, easy steps for people to get more familiar with, let's say, having all the money they ever wanted to have or the relationship that they desire?
You take you take whatever it is that you desire, money, relationship, whatever it may be, and you envision what it would be like to already have that. And in that process, you actually tap into what you really want. I know we've talked about this, what you really want is the feeling that you believe those things will give you. So everything we want is a frequency. A lot about this is in my book too, that came through for me when I was having these realizations. Everything we want is a frequency. It's a way of being. It's a feeling. So you envision whatever it is you want, identify the feeling that you think it will give you, and then now you have what you really want. Then you sort of take away that little roadmap you think to getting what it's going to be, and you expand your thinking and you begin to consider ways in which you can facilitate those feelings. You can tap into those frequencies right now, because that one path, that relationship or that job, that one path you saw, that's one path in an infinite amount of paths, and that's a path that's based on your past conditioning, which shapes the future sort of plans and possibilities that you see. So we open that up. How can you actually tap into that right now? Well, it could be doing that exact same visualization exercise, right? That you already have it, living from the end state, feeling those feelings. It could be, as a partner of mine and myself used to do, jumping on a mini trampoline, right? To feel fun and free and playful, if that's the frequency you want to tap into. It
Hmm.
could be being in nature. It could be meditating. It could be writing. It could be dancing. You find things that help you tap into that frequency. And ultimately, it's all internal. So when you start to do this more and more, you can just tap into it yourself without needing to jump through these loopholes.
Or on
So
trampoline.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Without having to jump on a trampoline. So it could be a certain song, right? Anyway, there's an infinite amount of things it could be, but you find what those things are for you and you bring those into your days, because now what's happening is you're starting to raise the set point on your frequency. If you acknowledge that your default way of thinking and feeling is something that's been conditioned. If you acknowledge that, then you also acknowledge, well, great, I can condition something else. I can recondition my default. I can recondition my default way of thinking. We know that through neuroplasticity. I can recondition my default way of feeling on a daily basis. And we do that through repetition. So you build these practices into your daily life. So each day, throughout the day, especially in the morning, you're anchoring into the frequency of whatever your desired outcomes are. You're doing that every day. You're experiencing that right now, and you do that more and more, it starts to become more naturally the way you feel, becomes more naturally the way you think. And then everything elevates from there, because again, by nature of however you want to understand manifestation, I think one of the most accessible ways to understand it is that your frequency shapes the way you think, feel, and act. And the way you think, feel, and act creates outcomes in the world, right? So those outcomes are ultimately an extension of your frequency, right? What you're seeing. So, and of course, the way you perceive it, because you and I both know if you're down in the dumps, low energy, sick, whatever it may be, it's hard to perceive things as great, right? If you're feeling great, almost anything can happen. You're like, I got this, no problem. So it shapes the way our frequency shapes our perception as well of the events in our lives. So, in essence, it is making the unfamiliar familiar. And that is so much of my work, whether it's an unfamiliar action, an unfamiliar habit. In this case, my favorite work to do, what I do more and more, an unfamiliar frequency.
Hmm.
Trying that on more and more and more until it becomes familiar. It's like I wrote an article about this called The Abundance Vortex, essentially about this process. So if anybody wants to read that, it's on my Substack and we can talk more about it in the community, which I know we'll talk about probably in a moment as well. But I want to really emphasize that this is within your ability, within anybody's ability to do with conscious attention consistently applied.
Hmm.
Who do you want to be in this world? How do you want to feel?
Right.
And making those choices more regularly. One of my favorite coaching questions is, what's the opportunity here? It's one of my favorite things to ask people. Just to give you an example, I've asked myself that question so many times that I don't even have to ask it anymore. My brain just looks for the opportunity in everything.
Hmm.
No matter what happens, I don't even have to ask myself. My brain just looks for the opportunity. That's not because I was born with a special brain that thinks that way. That's because I've programmed it to and conditioned it to by that question, by asking that question so many times.
That's
It's the
right.
same thing here. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what is, I think, in that beginning of the awakening, in that beginning of the questions coming in from seemingly nowhere, that we're starting to question our lives and our happiness and our fulfillment, etc. When that
Hmm.
begins to happen and we start to move into this place of, well, now things are, now I feel like I want to do something about this.
Hmm.
I want to actually, I don't know what yet. I don't know
Mm.
exactly where I go from here. But when you step into what you were just talking about, having the consciousness around shifting the programs, then it's about just taking those baby steps of making those shifts happen. But know that you've been programmed. So, like,
Hmm.
I love the term awakening because you are
Hmm.
awakening to your true self, to truth itself,
Yes.
from
Yeah.
out from the programs that were implanted in you.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
programming that happened to you runs deep. And
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
counteract it takes a lot of counteracting, right? You have to actively do it.
Quote of the podcast. Come on. Let's put that on the thumbnail.
Yeah,
But you're exactly right.
so
That's
profound.
exactly it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it
It
is,
is
it's
though, in a
active.
way, Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, oh, you want love, then be loving, right? It's get into the verb state of life
Yeah.
rather than in
Right.
in some, oh, magically wanting that noun or concept or thing to drop in. It's like, no, you got to get into the verb phase of that
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
In it, vibrating in it, creating the frequency
That's
of
it.
it, allowing it to flow through you so that you can be in in the essence of it.
And the beautiful, beautiful paradox of that is that when you're doing that, all of a sudden, whatever it is you thought you wanted becomes less important. Not saying you don't want it anymore. Sometimes you don't even want it anymore, but it becomes, you don't need it anymore. And that to me is actually when the closest you are to getting something is when you no longer need it because
Yeah.
you already have exactly what you had hoped that it would give you, right? Because that's what actually means you're a match for it.
Hmm. Totally. Yeah. When we're not looking for it is when the perfect opening is
Yeah.
created for it to arrive
Yeah.
and allow, and the allowing to receive rather than
Mhm.
the working so hard at the, because we've talked about the work that goes into this, and it does take work, it takes attention, it takes specific actions, it takes work. But where the work doesn't need to be applied is in the grasping of that thing that you want. The work is
Mm.
in the dissolution, right? The work is in the unlearning. It's in the just allowing. And there's a lot of work that goes into allowing, right? And we have to deconstruct so much that has been constructed
Mhm.
to allow those other types of, just to allow the idea that life doesn't have to be hard. I mean, that could
Yes.
be a person's lifetime work to just allow that one idea to be cool.
Absolutely. Especially if somebody's been their identity's been based on being a hard worker,
Yeah.
then the last thing they want is for their lives to be easy because that would threaten their very identity. Just as one example to go back to the identity thing. But you're right, it's the undoing. You can almost imagine that it's like a cork. Imagine a cork being held underwater. The cork naturally wants to rise, right? But imagine it's being held underwater by all these little like strings that are holding it to the bottom of a vessel. And you go through and you dissolve those strings, that cork just naturally rises. So it is the work is not in trying to rise the cork, right? Or raise your
Against
frequency in
the
this case.
restraint.
It's right against that. It's about getting rid of everything standing in the way, getting everything that's keeping it lowered. I think that's a very because these things are all our natural state. These
Mhm.
things really are our natural state of being. And that's definitely a belief that I have. That's absolutely truth I've experienced is that every single thing we want is who we are,
Mhm.
and it is the truth of who we are, the essence of who we are. So that's not, you don't need to try to be who you are. You just have to get rid of the other stuff.
And
Get rid
allow
of who
it.
you're not. Get rid of what's covering it up, what's
Mhm.
blocking it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like the peeling back the layers of the onion metaphor. There's so many metaphors that exist, and it's just all beautiful,
Mhm.
and leading back
Yeah.
to that truth. And I know that in the writing of your book, Notes on Awakening, you were uncovering your own truth, that you were diving into and do essentially living this process of what we're talking about,
Yes.
living it and then writing it. And then you put it into a book to share it, which I think is beautiful, and why you are such a wonderful teacher, mentor, guide, coach to people, because you've taken your own life's experience, filtered it through,
Mhm.
the ideas and the work and the illuminations, and you've filtered it through you, and then you've poured it back out to others so that it will hopefully help illuminate them as well. So I
Mhm.
have your book here. I wanted to open it up to just a page because I love doing this with
Cool.
books. I read a lot of books this way, of where I don't necessarily read them from front to back. I will use them in a divinatory way and just open them up in whatever feels right for me. And then whatever words are on that page are the ones meant for the moment. So I
Mm.
wanted to do
Yeah.
that and then read out what I open to, and have you reflect on that. Sound cool?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Ooh, it's a short passage. I don't know if this is a separate thing from, it might be part of a bigger thing, the page 4, but I want to read this one
Okay.
piece of it because that's
Okay.
what immediately hit me.
Yeah.
Whatever arises, welcome it. It's here to be seen, felt, and heard. It's here to be freed. Oh, how perfect is that
Mhm.
with what we were talking about?
Yeah.
I want to read that again for the audience. You know it probably in your bones, but whatever arises, welcome it. It's here to be seen, felt, and heard. It's here to be freed.
Whatever arises within you, it's the integration of that internal experience and a way of living in which you are welcoming life itself and you are welcoming all parts of you. And not only is that one of the most freeing ways to live, but that actually in and of itself facilitates freedom because a lot of these emotions that we struggle with or thought patterns that we struggle with represent parts of ourselves that we have not integrated and represent energetic patterns and frequencies that we have not integrated. And integration is simply the welcoming of it into our present moment awareness, into our unconditional present moment awareness in which it stops being separate. That's the integration. It's the opposite of fragmentation. It becomes part of the whole. part of the whole of who we are, which is that present moment awareness. So that little bit there really speaks to this experience of welcoming everything that arises within you as part of your experience,
Mhm.
rather than, no, I don't want to feel that.
Yes, and that last bit, to be freed,
Yeah.
right? To welcome it and then free it, because we don't need to hold on to past identities and
Hmm.
beliefs that we do not, that aren't of our highest and best. And
Hmm.
we don't need to hold on to these things. So we can essentially let them go, but there's a recognition process in that. It's kind of like, okay, I see you. I love you even.
Hmm.
And now you're free. Like, you want to hang out here and like be in this different place with us? Great. But you're free to come and go, and it's cool. You're not trapped any longer
That's
within
great.
my set of controls.
Ah, that's beautiful. Right. You're welcome here and you're welcome elsewhere, like, yeah,
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 you may be
yeah.
needed elsewhere.
Yeah, that's so good. What a beautiful full circle moment, because I've never on some level probably, but I've never really quite interpreted it the way that you just said it. And that speaks to that co-creation, right? You were literally creating that passage through your perception of it based on what you just shared. Yeah.
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 And
And I
that's why I
love
love
that.
books like yours, because they're with shorter passages,
Yeah.
and there's a profound, what's the profoundness? Is that the right word?
I
I
don't
don't
know,
know why that doesn't
profundity
sound right,
maybe? I'm not sure, but yeah.
but there's something profound about
Yes.
the brevity and the choice of words, and to then have those be able to speak so much volume but in such a small amount of words. So brevity is
Yeah.
a beautiful art as well.
Yeah.
The link, of course, to your book will be in the show notes, as well as to, what did you mention earlier that we want to make sure? Oh, your Substack article. I want to put that link in the show notes too, so
Great.
send that to
Yeah, the
me.
abundance vortex. I'll get that to you.
Yeah. And Zach, I'm so excited that you're joining the Everyday Mystic, joining me in this mentorship journey. This is going to
Me
be
too.
so powerful and fun. I'm
Mhm.
really leaning into the fun part, because this
Yeah.
mentorship is going to be for people like us, people who are working in this space, but who, like all humans, get caught up in their own shit. So I find with other healers, spiritual teachers, coaches, mentors, guides, people who are serving from their heart, doing this work for humanity, often lose a sense of what they need for themselves in the process of that giving. And in the process of that giving, they end up giving it all away, because they're not spending time filling up their own cup, reflecting back on in for themselves on and using the work for themselves.
Mhm.
Like, you give out your heart, your energy, you are giving more than, and I mean, yeah, okay, people in a corporate job are giving energy too, absolutely.
Mhm.
They also need to be have
Mhm.
their cup filled as well, of course. But the entrepreneur who works in this space tends to be, oftentimes they put themselves last. They give out because they're driven to want to, they've been helped by the therapies, the work that they've been trained in. They've
Right.
been helped by it at a time. And now they're like, now it's my time to give it out to the world, but forgetting that they need to give it back to themselves. The mentorship is going to be so much about the people that come in receiving their own medicine, receiving what they so beautifully gift out to others, and being in a space to receive that, and in a space where they can come and re-energize, regenerate their own giving muscles, and be able to let go into that. And so I see it as a beautiful space for that, as well as a beautiful space to mentor up people who are just starting to explore this world. Because you mentioned it earlier, it's like those who start to awaken and explore this path for themselves often are called to do the work.
Mhm.
and to change their profession often, or even,
Mhm.
they might start with a side hustle, but then they're like,
Mhm.
I've got to do this. This is my calling.
Yeah, yeah, because they recognize the profound need for it on this planet and they want to bring their life into alignment with that truth. And so it's harder for them to tolerate paradigms that are rooted in scarcity and lack and ego. Um, and the other thing I want to say about the entrepreneurs in this space is that what I've found, because I work with a lot of coaches myself, is that a lot of times they have a hard time practicing and integrating what they know to be true and the essence of their work with the way they do business. So a lot of times it becomes because there's not a lot of the business advice and frameworks and modalities and ways of operating that we see are again rooted in scarcity, lack, ego. They're antiquated. They're part of more of a hustle paradigm, or they're very mechanical, hyper masculine. They lack any sort of sense of this deeper world in which we operate oftentimes. So because of that, sometimes entrepreneurs in this space experience a fragmentation where their work is one way, but then the way they run their business is another way. And it
Yes.
doesn't need to be like that, right? You can run your business using the same exact principles that you live by and that you do your work by. And that's something I love helping people with too.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm so excited for us to help people in that way. It is and the people that we are attracting to this mentorship are those that, just like you said, they have the knowledge. They've got
Hmm.
the skill sets. It's about being in a space of remembrance of it and be able to be in that receptive state of
Yeah.
primordial creation of where you go, okay, I can just allow now and
Yeah.
allow this understanding to come through. And also, there's a bit of mystical strategery that we will offer to people around how to go about building and running a business that's in a more, we could use the word feminine, a more flow way, a more mystical way that's
Hmm.
opening you up to the resources of source consciousness and the resources of our higher guidance and tapping
Nice.
into much deeper resources than the traditional
Hmm.
knowledge that you've received. And it's a different way of working, opening
It is.
yourself up to
Yeah.
that flow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same. It's very similar to what we were saying earlier, because a lot of times people go into business because they want to experience freedom, abundance, right? Those types of things. Similar to what we were talking about, they can forget to actually run their business from those frequencies,
Mhm.
right? Instead, it's the business as a vehicle to experience those things rather than the business as a vehicle to express those things.
Yeah.
And that then just again, everything elevates from there. It's incredible what happens and what takes shape from that way of being.
It's so beautifully said. So, for anyone listening who is either interested in the healing spiritual consciousness professions or already working in the space as a spiritual healer, coach, mentor, teacher, or practitioner, this mentorship is built for you, designed to be that space to receive those frequencies, to get in resonance with the higher consciousness that can help guide the business, get really powerful types of strategy from us. It's very practical, but it's also mystical. So the mystic mentorship can be accessed through the Everyday Mystic website. You go to theeverydaymistic.org/mentorship. Zack, among myself and three other powerful mentors, will be guiding weekly sessions and offering you these types of transmissions and activations and coaching and guidance and support and the space, the container to connect and collaborate with each other as well, because you're all
Oh
powerful
yeah.
beings that are going to come into this space to bring your own energy, essence, and genius as well.
Hmm.
Theeverydaymystic.org/mentorship for that. You get access to those live weekly sessions as well as this private online community where we'll all be in as well, conversing and discussing and supporting and collaborating. So, Zach, this has been such a beautiful collab today and conversation. I could go on and on with you all day, but any final words, thoughts, feelings you want to share before we say goodbye?
The only one that's coming to my mind right now is how much I love how your brand embodies exactly what you said, even just the everyday mystic. You know, the everyday is the practical, right? It's kind of in this world, and the mystic is not of this world, right? The mystic is the energy, the energetics of it, the invisible realm, right? The frequencies. And we are both. And, you know, that makes up our experience here. So I love what you're doing. That's my final thought. And I love what you're doing with bringing this group of mentors together. It's going to be really fun to see what this becomes. And one of my favorite things to do is drop in with people and to have a container in which we can do that. And again, I'm not the only one. We have this amazing group, including yourself. It'll just be fun to see what becomes of that and what happens and how that serves people and what community it attracts and generates. Because, you know, you talk about grounding yourself in these frequencies, something we talked about earlier. A community is one of the best ways to do that. Being around people who are embodying that themselves is one of the single best ways to make that a consistent part of your life, to raise that default, like we said. So it's just a beautiful opportunity, and I'm looking forward to being a part of it. And such a pleasure to be back on here for the second time.
Oh man, amazing. The second of many more times.
Of many more. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Zach.
An annual episode. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Carissa.